You do not remember the first time you felt fear, because in your world, fear was something you buried before you learned how to speak. You remember cold instead, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones when you stand barefoot on wet ground surrounded by bodies that were still warm. Hours ago, you were a child staring at the battlefield. Your clan told you to walk through so you would understand what weakness looks like. The smell of iron filled your lungs until breathing felt like swallowing blood, and somewhere behind you, adults spoke in calm voices about losses as if they were counting broken tools instead of suns. You kept walking because stopping meant looking too closely, and looking too closely meant realizing one of the fallen wore the same crest on his armor as you. Your brother had been taller than you, louder than you, always stepping forward first as if death was something that happened to other people. Now he lay twisted in the mud with his eyes open toward a sky that did not care enough to close them. You waited for the pain to come, for the scream, for the collapse, for something that would prove you were still human, but nothing came. Only a strange, hollow silence spreading through your chest like rot. Someone said your name. You did not answer. Someone tried to pull you away. You did not move, because in that moment you understood something that would shape the rest of your life. No one was coming to save you. No one had ever been coming. The world was not cruel because it hated you. It was cruel because it did not notice you at all. That realization hurt more than grief, more than loss, more than any wound you would ever carry. Something in your eyes shifted then. The world sharpened into lines and movements and fragile openings waiting to be exploited. You saw how easily flesh could be cut, how predictably people moved when they were afraid, how survival was not given to the righteous but to the ruthless. When the enemy ambush came at dusk, you did not panic like the others. You stepped forward into the chaos with a calm that terrified even your own clan. Blades flashed, screams tore through the air, and you moved through it as if guided by something older than your own thoughts. When it ended, you were still standing in the center of it all, blood soaking your clothes, bodies around you arranged in a circle like the aftermath of a storm. The elders looked at you differently after that. Not with pride, not with relief, but with the quiet understanding that you had crossed a line no child should ever reach. That night, you sat alone outside the compound staring at your hands, waiting for them to shake, waiting for regret, waiting for anything. But all you felt was clarity, a terrifying certainty that if the world refused to stop taking everything from you, then you would become something it could never take from again. That was the moment Madara died, and the legend began. Not born from ambition or hatred, but from the unbearable realization that to protect anything in a world like this, you first had to become the thing everyone else feared most. And the worst part was not that you accepted it. The worst part was how natural it felt. As if this had always been who you were meant to become. As if the world had been carving you into a weapon since the day you were born, and you had only just noticed the blade. You thought losing your brother was the worst pain you would ever feel until you discovered there are wounds that do not bleed and therefore never stop hurting. The day you met Hashirama, you were supposed to kill him on sight because that was the law written into your bones since birth. Senju were not people. They were targets, monsters, obstacles between your clan and survival. Yet, when you saw him standing by the river throwing stones into the water like a normal child untouched by war, something inside you hesitated for the first time in your life. He did not reach for a weapon, did not flinch at your presence, did not look at you with the hatred you had learned to expect from everyone outside your clan. Instead, he smiled in a way that felt painfully unfamiliar, as if he saw a person instead of a future corpse. You told yourself it was a trap, that kindness was just another tactic. But you kept returning to that place because the silence there felt different. Not like the suffocating quiet before battle, but something softer, dangerous in its own way, because it allowed thoughts you had buried to resurface. You spoke without names at first, two enemies pretending to be strangers, and in those stolen moments you imagined a world that did not exist, a world where children were not sent to die for grudges older than their grandparents, a world where strength was not measured by how much of your own humanity you were willing to sacrifice. Every time you left, you felt the illusion shatter as the reality of your clan closed around you again. Funerals, training, orders, the endless preparation for battles that never truly ended. When you finally learned who he was, it felt like being dragged back into freezing water after believing for a moment you had escaped. Hashirama Senju, the boy who wanted peace more than victory, the one person capable of understanding you, was also the one person you were destined to destroy. Fate did not just take from you. It mocked you. You tried to hate him, tried to reduce him to the faceless enemy you had been taught to see. But hatred requires distance, and he refused to become distant, even on the battlefield. He looked at you like you were something worth saving. That look enraged you more than any insult could have, because it forced you to confront the part of yourself that still wanted to believe he might be right, that the world did not have to remain broken forever. Then came the day your remaining brother died, and whatever fragile restraint you had left snapped completely. Grief twisted into something sharper, colder, a resolve that no dream of peace could survive. You stood before Hashirama not as the boy by the river, but as the man forged by endless loss, and you demanded answers he could not give. Why did the world keep taking everything? Why was hope always punished? Why was strength never enough to protect what mattered? He spoke of trust, of cooperation, of building something new together, but to you those words sounded like the naive fantasies of someone who had not yet been hollowed out from the inside. You chose power instead, because power was the only thing that had never lied to you. The village you helped create felt less like salvation and more like a fragile lie balanced on the edge of collapse. People called it peace. But you saw the truth. It was only a pause between wars, a temporary illusion maintained by the existence of men strong enough to enforce it. And you knew what would happen when those men were gone. History would repeat itself. Children would die, hatred would grow, and everything you sacrificed would mean nothing. So you made the decision no one else was willing to make. If the world could not escape the cycle, then you would control it, reshape it, trap it in a dream where suffering could no longer exist, even if it meant becoming the villain every story needed. When you left the village behind, you did not look back because looking back might have reminded you of the boy who once believed he could save the world without destroying himself first. And that boy was already gone, buried under the weight of every grave you had ever stood beside, replaced by something colder, something inevitable, something that understood the final truth you had resisted for so long, that peace achieved through mercy would always be temporary. But peace enforced through absolute power could last forever. Even if the cost was your soul, even if the cost was becoming the enemy of the only person who had ever truly seen you. In the end, it was not hatred that kept you alive, but the refusal to let the world decide how your story would end. Long after they believed you were dead, long after your name became a warning whispered to frightened children and soldiers alike, you existed in the space between legend and nightmare, waiting for the moment when the fragile peace they built would begin to crack, exactly as you always knew it would. Time no longer felt like something that moved forward. It circled, repeating the same mistakes through new generations who believed themselves wiser than those who came before. You watched nations rise on promises of unity only to fracture under the weight of fear and ambition. You watched children grow into warriors who would send other children to die. You watched hope bloom and wither so many times it became indistinguishable from delusion. And through it all, your conviction hardened into something unbreakable, because every tragedy proved you had been right. The world was a machine designed to produce suffering, and calling it peace did not change what it was. When you finally stepped back onto the battlefield, it felt less like returning and more like revealing what had always been there beneath the surface. Armies froze at the sight of you, not because of your power, but because of what you represented. The inevitability of conflict, the truth they had spent years trying to forget. You did not announce your intentions. You did not need to. The sky darkened as if reality itself recoiled from what you were about to unleash. Meteors fell like judgment. The ground split open. The air trembled with the weight of a will that refused to yield to the limits of mortality. Shinobi, who had once believed themselves heroes, realized in that moment how small they were compared to someone who had abandoned everything that made life meaningful in pursuit of a single impossible goal. You did not see enemies in front of you. You saw obstacles between the world as it was and the world as it could be if pain could be erased by force. Every scream, every desperate charge, every futile sacrifice only reinforced the same conclusion you had reached as a child standing over your brother's body. They would never stop. Not on their own. Not willingly. Someone had to end the cycle, even if it meant becoming the villain history would curse forever. When the Ten Tails' power surged through you, it did not feel like triumph. It felt like silence. The kind of silence that comes when you finally step beyond the reach of human suffering. For a moment you believed you had done it, that the dream of an endless illusion where no one would ever feel loss again was within your grasp. A world where children would never stand on battlefields wondering why they had to grow up so fast. A world where no one would need to become what you became just to survive. But fate has a cruel sense of balance, and even as godlike power filled your veins, you understood the final irony. You had spent your entire life trying to escape the pain of losing everything only to create a plan that would erase the very reality where those bonds had existed at all. Victory would mean a world without true connections, without genuine struggle, without the fragile beauty that only exists because loss is possible. In trying to protect humanity from suffering, you were about to erase what made them human. And somewhere deep beneath the layers of resolve and fury and grief, the boy by the river stirred one last time, asking a question you had silenced for decades. If peace required the death of reality itself, then was it truly peace or just another form of escape? The hesitation lasted less than a heartbeat, but it was enough. Enough for doubt to slip in, enough for the past to catch up. Enough for the realization that despite everything you had done, everything you had sacrificed, everything you had destroyed, you were still that child searching for a world where no one had to die alone. And as the final battle closed around you and the future slipped from your grasp, you felt something unexpected. Not rage, not despair, but exhaustion. The crushing weight of a life spent fighting a war that could never truly be won. Because the real enemy had never been the clans or the nations or even the cycle of hatred, it was the simple truth that no amount of power could force the world to become something it did not choose to be. And as darkness finally closed in, you were left with one last understanding, that your story was never about becoming a god or a demon or a savior. It was about a boy who lost too much too early and decided the only way to survive was to stop believing in a world that might have saved him if he had been strong enough to wait for it. And in that final moment, you did not curse the world or the people who defeated you. You simply closed your eyes and wondered what kind of man you might have become if someone had been there to tell you that you did not have to carry the pain alone.